It's hard to believe that we start out with the season. It almost feels awkward going to a stand, just trying to pull things together, pull your clothing together, what gear you're going to go out on the stand. We started in Kentucky this year and it was extremely hot. I think up to 87, 88 degrees. So that kind of throws us for a loop too, because I love hunting cold fronts. But now you slam through the season and we're talking about the pre-rut. Pre-rut is an incredibly special time of the year. And I put here as point number one of the pre-rut as there's weeks of healing leading up to it. And what I mean by that is we all have some of those favorite rut stands. Those favorite rut stands have accounted for 70-80% of my bucks going back for decades. So when I say it's a special time of the year, it's a very special time of the year, that cold front during the pre-rut. Those last, around here, the last 8 days, 10 days of October, we get those cold fronts. I'm out there hunting. And sometimes we get our first snows then. I'd say half the years up here in Minnesota, Wisconsin. When that happens, and it's that time of year, the oldest, most mature bucks fall. And I want to talk to you about how to put yourself in position to take advantage of this special time of the year. When I say weeks of healing, when we go out and we have that awkward time when we're trying to figure out gear, what stands, we're trying to get on the bucks are changing habits. You have that annual whitetail shift that takes place from September to October every single year. We're waiting for a few bucks to arrive here. Most of the bucks we have right now are going to stay. We just keep seeing them more often, more frequently, and you can really narrow down their patterns. We have patterns for bucks that we can really successfully hunt in end of October, in November, early December, that aren't even close to those patterns yet. So we're waiting on those patterns. We have new stand locations, water holes, whatever it might be, where we're not even sitting in them yet because we're waiting. In those weeks of forgiveness, when we start out in that awkward phase of hunting, a lot of times, I'm not saying we don't shoot deer, but there's a lot of damage done. We tend to push it. We see social media posts of people shooting big bucks, and we can't wait to get ours. Why are we shooting something? How come they shot something? We can't wait to get out. We press it. We even go out when there's bad winds. For a certain stand, we go into certain stands. It might be our favorite rut stands. I had a question this morning. What do you think about, there's a cold front right now going through. What do you think about going to my favorite stand tomorrow? Favorite morning stand. So they go into this morning stand. You still have 3 weeks before the pre-rut, when we're shooting this video. And I look at it like you have weeks of forgiveness. So if you go in there and happen to blow it, you have 3 weeks. And a lot of times those bucks are not even in that pre-rut pattern yet anyways, or anywhere near that location. And that's kind of a big misunderstanding, that these deer all of a sudden just become active in the pre-rut during the daylight, and they've always been there. No, they've been somewhere else. They're just waiting to move into that pre-rut area. That's where their fall range, their core fall range, where you have fall cover, fall food. A lot of the food around here, even in the ag fields, the alfalfa is waiting for its first frost of the year. And when it happens, it turns yellow, stemmy, dormant, and the deer don't like it. The corn, half the corn's already been chopped around here. It'll be picked more later this month. Beans will be harvested early October in most locations, mid-October. So there's a lot of changes going in ag areas, let alone in the hardwoods out on public land. All of a sudden you get leaf drop. You get small game hunters in the woods. You get white oak acorns that are dropped, a lot of sign, but then there's no more white oak acorns. And then they move to a red oak acorn area. Maybe you have beech nuts in your area that are peaking for that year. So there's a time of change all throughout October, and then bam, the pre-rut kicks in, and that's why a lot of these bucks shift. So you're going in right now and spooking a deer. Well, if you let there be 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, depending on your location, fewer weeks in a fantasy land state like Iowa, Kansas, where there's fewer hunters and deer can take a lot more pressure, a lot more weeks of forgiveness when you get up into the northern states and upper Midwest, where you get a lot more hunters, sometimes 10 times more hunters in a given bow season. I can think of Kansas uses 25,000 bow hunters, and Michigan had over 400,000 at one time. So we're talking almost 20 times more hunters in the woods in October than some other states, depending on what state you live in. And in that case, you need to allow more weeks to go by for the deer to forgive you in a given stand. So go take a Hail Mary early October, but you need to allow 2 to 3 weeks to pass for your best rut stands. And if you don't, that's the problem. You always wonder why Billy down the road is shooting a big buck every single year. Well, Billy's probably not pounding his stands on October 8th, October 12th, October 15th, October 18th, October 21st, and the 23rd consistently. Billy's allowing those weeks of forgiveness to happen. And then when you go into a pre-rut stand, it's like money. You can count on it happening. So those weeks of forgiveness are important. Let those pass, especially for your best locations on the property, best locations on public land. You know, there's some public land stands where you want to beat everyone there. And then there's some rut cruising stands. I can think of some cool stands in Ohio where I've hunted, where they're on some bench, some saddle crossing, where there's no deer there in early October. But when you get into early November, I want to sit in one of those stands and just let it happen, because when I walk in there in the morning, I might be shooting a buck from 2 miles away that walks over about an hour and a half later because he's just cruising big timber, big woods, and big open public land, and I get my shot. The morning stand soak. And this is part of the beauty of Weeks of Forgiveness, is we're not even hunting those great morning stands, pre-rut stands, until the pre-rut. We're not taking a chance. What if there's does and fawns, young bucks around the area, bedding area? We go in, we hunt it 3 or 4 times, we spook those deer to another property. We're hunting small private lands that can't take much. You know, it's interesting, people talk about that hunting private land's easy, having food plots easy. You know what people don't understand when they don't have private land and they're not used to doing it and working at it hard? You have to hunt way harder on private land because you can't afford to make mistakes, because if you do, they're on to the next property. Public land, you just go find a new spot. That's what we do. I love hunting public land. It's less stress. When we go out, every sit on private land, we have to be calculated. We don't have to be calculated about today, just today. We have to be calculated about tomorrow, the next day, a week from now, next weekend, 2 weeks from now. We have to be very careful with every single move. And if we make a mistake, it could cost us a season for a target buck. That's literally how every sit happens. We can't blow out a food plot, ruins the land. We can't blow out a water hole, a bedding area, ruins the land, ruins the land. We have to be very, very careful on public land. You just go sit somewhere else. So these morning soak stands, where we account for a huge percentage of our mature bucks, oldest bucks we shoot, 5, 6-year-olds, 4-year-olds every year, we haven't hunted them. We want them to soak, age like a fine wine. They just sit there and get better and better every day we don't hunt it. You have to have the patience to be able to do that, and it's really critical. Now we'll talk about where those are. But when does all this take place? If you're in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, over into Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, you could stretch this over to North Dakota, portions of South Dakota, even portions of northern Illinois, northern Indiana, Ohio, northern Pennsylvania. Once you get into those last, let's just count for that range right there, 5 to 10 days of October, and you get those cold fronts. The cold fronts don't cause does to come into estrus. They cause bucks to be more active during the daylight. If you don't think weather suppresses movement, how about going to lower Michigan? Let's say it is October 28th and it's 80-degree temperatures and there's 35-mile-an-hour south winds. You're not going to see much daylight movement. But 4 days later, when you get a giant cold front, or 4 days before that, when instead of the daytime high being 85 or 80, it's 58, mature bucks will express movement during that time. It's when they start hitting daylight water holes. They move to their food source in the afternoon a little bit earlier. They'll move a lot within their bedding area. They'll get up more often. They'll push around younger bucks, and they'll generally just move more during daylight, even if it's in one little spot of 5 acres. And that relates to some of the stands we like to sit in. But that takes place in that last 5 to 10 days of October. In those states, if you live south of there, for a couple states wide, you get down into West Virginia, Kentucky, southern Ohio, you get over into Missouri, southern Iowa. In those locations, then you're looking at that pre-rut starting more around November 1st. About a week later than 2 states north, for example. And this happens like clockwork every single year. And some people will say, well, the moon's telling me the rut's not going to take place till November 5th. So you don't go hunting till November 5th, you just missed not only the pre-rut, but part of the peak rut. A lot of folks are waiting for the pre-rut to happen. If you don't have mature bucks in your area, you're not going to see a lot of sign. A young buck lays down just a fraction of the amount of rubs and scrapes as a mature buck. So when you get in the pre-rut, if you have mature bucks around, and this is why 2 miles away, somebody can say, wow, the deer are real ruddy. They're leaving lots of sign. Well, they have mature bucks, you don't. So that's why rut watches are so ridiculous, because someone 5 miles away can be seeing one thing and you're seeing something different. That's not reflective of what's going on with the rut overall. It's reflective of what's going on with the rut based on mature buck activity on those two lands. So a big difference you have to know. Kansas, that'd be the first week in November. And that pushes the rut back on everything too. So you're looking for that pre-rut time, the end of October, first part of November, depending on where you live, north to south. But what's really cool about that, it's going to happen at the same time every single year. You can plan on it. So when you're in central Michigan, you're in northern Pennsylvania, you're in southeast Minnesota, you're in northern Iowa, and you see a giant cold front come through, and it's October 25th, then I've talked about a lot where I kill my bucks. Here's the temperature range, what it's been. All of a sudden it goes down here. Wind speeds go down, temperatures go down, and this is where I kill my bucks. Often back-to-back days in Minnesota, Wisconsin, I'm just following the rut, following the temperature drop and the cold front. But that's when I shoot my deer. You have to have these days, 4 or 5 days, to experience that drop, and then that's when you shoot those deer at that time. It just puts them on their feet more often, and you can count on it like clockwork every single year. If one year the cold front around here is October 22nd, then I'm killing on 24th, 25th. If that cold front doesn't take place till the 27th, 28th, then I'm killing 28th, 29th, 30th. Just every single year like clockwork, and the bigger the drop, the better. Again, it's not pushing does into estrus, it's just pushing bucks on their feet in front of your stands and in front of these pre-rut stands. And where are those stands at? AM, I'm focusing on bedding. It does not mean I'm going into the most remote bedding and just sitting right in the middle of it. I'm sitting on the outside of it. I'm sitting in between bedding. I'm sitting closer to bedding than food, and that gets me around that food in the morning. I don't want to walk through that food in the morning, you're spooking deer. Those are some of my best stands. We're sitting on the outside of bedding areas waiting for bucks to become a little active and move around those areas. You're sitting on the outside because they're going to express a lot of movement within that 5 or 10 acres that they're bedding. You don't care what bed they're in. You just want to be on the outside of that because they're going to move around a lot within that one location. That's where a lot of times, even when they have radio collar studies, these deer are not moving mile to mile at that time. They're just moving a lot within a short period of time. Right in that short range, that few acres. You want to be on the outside of that few acres. You want to access to the outside of that, blow your scent to the outside of that. You don't want to blow your scent at the food, walk through the food in the morning, because then you won't see that movement in the bedding areas that relate to that food because you already spooked the deer out and they're not going to be there. Midday, pre-rut, in those time frames, is not a good time to hunt middle of the day unless you're hunting in such high pressure private areas that you have a lot of hunters around you that are getting out of their stands for lunchtime. They're kicking deer into your lap. Other than that, there's really no natural movement at that time. This is not a time that mature bucks are moving 24/7. They're not moving hours and hours. In fact, they don't during the peak rut either. They always take breaks. And so imagine this time of year, all of a sudden these bucks are super active in the morning hours, and they haven't been all year. They're active for 3-4 hours in the cool of the day. And all of a sudden it gets a little warmer during the day. It was 33 degrees to start out the morning, 40 degrees. All of a sudden it's going to go to a daytime high of 71. They're just napping. They're napping about 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they'll move just for that last hour. So midday, I'm getting out. I'm not even hunting in the midday, getting things done. And then I'm going back for a 3 or 4 hour sit in the afternoon, and I'm focusing on food or food source movement. It doesn't mean I'm sitting on the food and spoiling the movement because they can't get in or out without spooking deer. This is not the outdoor channel where we're sticking a blind in the food plot and just coming in a setup that's only hunted twice a year. This is a lot different because we need to conserve. Again, going back to private land hunting is really tough because you make one mistake, you're done. I know people that hunt only public land are going to think, oh yeah, whatever. And I'm telling you, I hunt public land every year, and I do it for a vacation from having to think as much. I like the low stress of just going out and sitting in the woods on public land. A lot different. I don't have to worry about saving my property for a month from now, 2 months from now. I just have to worry about tomorrow, the next day, and then that's it. We're leaving, and we're getting out of there. Completely different. Again, I go on public land hunts to relax. This is not the time, again, to be sitting all day. It's morning stand by bedding, midday take a break, afternoon go to a food source stand. I love water holes 50 yards from food. You say, why don't you combine a water hole on food source? Well, that's one reason. Because if you're on a food source, you're more likely to spook a deer in or out, getting in or out of that stand. Number two, I want that separation, because a mature buck will travel to a water hole during the daylight, tucked back in the woods 100 yards off a food source, much, much more often than he will visit that food source, even if it's a nice little hunting plot that's secluded. He'll still visit that water hole. That's a low risk stop to him. It's a 2-minute stop and he's on his way. So I want those separations of tree stand locations, because the water hole at that time of the year can be hit any time of the day. That food plot's only going to probably be hit by a mature buck in the last half hour. So I don't want to diminish the value of the water hole by sticking it in the food plot. That's a rookie mistake when it comes to water holes and food plots and combining them. Always want that separation. How long does this period last? And this is where it's really fleeting. I see that last 5 to 10 days, because if you get a nice cold front, you start experiencing the roller coaster of the entire rut at that time on the 22nd around here. Get a giant cold front coming through on the 22nd, great hunting right after it. Gets warm, get a nice cold front on the 29th, or end of the pre-rut, lasts for about 8 to 10 days, and then it gets into the peak rut, and that lasts for about 8 to 10 days, and then you get a chance at the post rut where those mature bucks don't want to let go, and if there's favorable cruising conditions of good weather and cold temperatures, you might get a nice buck more mid-November. And no, the rut, it does not peak around here in November 15th. It does if you don't figure out and calculate in the second rut 30 days later and the third rut after that, and you average those all together. It pushes the peak rut back a week, which is what a lot of scientists and research biologists do, and that's unfortunate, because around here when we get into the 12th, 13th, 14th of November, we're really on the backside of the rut. That's more the post rut, where we get those long range cruisers, those last few days of the rut, where they don't want to let go, so they're visiting some doe hot spots. I really like to focus on food source and afternoon hunting at that time. But bottom line is, this is a short period of time, and if you blink, you miss it. You don't get it till the following year. Don't miss out. It's really important, and that's where you have the lockdown too. Don't forget about the lockdown. So you have this pre-rut period right here, peak rut period right here, 8 to 10 days, and then you have this little day right here. And kind of look at this as the buildup of does coming into estrus, and then all of a sudden, bam, they're coming into estrus right here, and then they're really starting to tail off. This period right here, every buck is invited to the party. Every buck gets a doe. But that second doe, third doe, think about in that primary rut, this primary rut right here, the entire time frame of about 3 weeks, a mature buck breeds an average of 2 to 4 does during that period of time. The first doe is really easy. Second doe is a little tougher. Third and fourth is really tough. That's when they start ranging out. Those bucks that you had in the pre-rut that are expressing their movements, the rub and scrapes, that's when you could lose them, is during the peak rut. That's when they could be gone for a day or two on someone else's land, let alone the post rut. If it's favorable conditions, they might be 2 miles away. Especially when you figure in movement of hunters and pressure during that time of year. So when every buck is invited to the party, you can seem like all of a sudden, boy, there's nothing taking place. So when you don't have mature bucks in your area, you don't experience the pre-rut. You don't experience the rut lockdown, because there's no slowdown to the rut. It hasn't even started in your spot yet. And all of a sudden you're at the peak rut, you think it's pre-rut, and you're 12 days off. That happens to a lot of folks every year. Don't be that person. Plan for the pre-rut taking place. Plan for where to sit based on the time of the day, mostly morning and afternoon. Afternoon for an hour, morning for 5 hours. Think of that. You're sitting in the afternoon for 3 to 4, but you only expect movement in that last hour or two of the day. Plan for that, know where to sit, plan for it. The cool thing is, every single year. If I had the opportunity and I needed to do this, I'd try to get that last weekend of October. Let's say it's the 27th, 28th. I'm trying to think. My daughter's getting married on the 12th of October. So that puts the 26th. So let's say I could take a long weekend around here. It'd be the 26th, and I'd try to slant it towards a Monday, Tuesday, or a Thursday, Friday, depending on the weather. And then I'd go the next weekend, plan on peak rut hunting. The next weekend after that would be more like post rut, and then the rut's over. So I'd look at those 3 weekends in a row, try to take a long weekend and enjoy the pre-rut on that first one, and then we'll talk about peak rut strategies to come in the future. Hope you're having a great hunt and you're well prepared for the pre-rut. This is a time you cannot miss. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our earthway spreaders for sale. Great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the Rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.